The chandeliers shimmered like stars above the sea of Lagos's elite, their laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the marble halls of the Ifeanyi estate. Waiters weaved between silk gowns and tuxedos. But one figure moved differently, quiet, deliberate. Amara Obi, clad in the simple uniform of a housemaid, kept to the shadows, her dark eyes never straying far from the center of attention. Leonard Leo Ifeanyi. He stood tall beneath the golden light, exchanging handshakes and humble smiles, his polished charm wrapped in a designer tuxedo. Guests swirled around him, toasting his vision, praising his integrity, and recounting his rise from a modest Surulere boy to tech royalty. Amara tightened her grip on a silver tray, lips curling into a quiet scoff. Humble beginnings? Unshakable character? Let's see how true that is. She dipped her head and moved through the room, her movements trained, invisible, but her mind sharp and blazing. Every gesture, every laugh from Leo, every compliment he accepted without flinch, only deepened her resolve. The night dragged on in a blur of champagne and secrets. Just past midnight, as the party thinned and music softened into background murmur, Amara slipped into the quiet hallway near the east wing. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but the weight of what she'd come to do. Then, footsteps. He appeared suddenly around the corner, alone, phone in hand, distracted. Leo bumped into her lightly, then looked up. "Oh, sorry," he said, his voice low, warm, and utterly disarming. His eyes flicked to hers, pausing. A smile touched his lips. "You all right?" Amara nodded, murmuring a soft, "Yes, sir," careful to keep her voice even. But inside, her thoughts roared. He didn't recognize her, not yet. Not as the daughter of Chuka Obi, the man whose name once stood beside Leo's on the company's founding documents, the man who lost everything in a scandal Leo walked away from unscathed. Now, here she was, in his house, wearing a disguise, with a plan that even she hadn't fully mapped out. All she knew was this: she hadn't come to serve drinks. She'd come for the truth, or revenge, or maybe, just maybe, something neither of them saw coming. Amara Obi had once been the golden girl of her family, the top economics graduate with a future as bright as the Lagos skyline. Her father, Paul Obi, was a shrewd investor and beloved figure in the business world, his name quietly respected in boardrooms and balance sheets. Together, they had envisioned a legacy, a family-owned financial advisory firm backed by shares in promising tech startups. But everything changed the day Paul poured his resources into a rising company called Leo Tech, co-founded by a then-hungry and ambitious Leonard Ifeanyi. Within months, Paul was muscled out in a ruthless buyout masked as a strategic restructuring. The scandal never made headlines. Leo's people were too good at keeping his name clean. Paul, however, unraveled in silence. Depression took root. Friends distanced. His health declined. Amara remembered the quiet mornings when he'd sit staring at nothing, clutching a worn leather briefcase filled with legal papers no one ever read. When he died of a stroke, there were no tributes, no eulogies, just Amara, alone, burying the man whose life had been quietly. And still, no one blamed Leo. There was no proof, just whispers. A vague clause buried in a contract, old emails that hinted at betrayal, but never screamed it. Yet Amara felt the truth like a stone in her chest. Leo had played the game better, and her father had paid the price. Now, 2 years later, Amara lived in her aunt's cramped duplex in Surulere, juggling part-time work and grief that never quite let go. But beneath her quiet routine pulsed a single consuming mission: to get close to Leonard Ifeanyi, to understand how he destroyed her father, to find something, anything, that could expose the truth. And if she couldn't, then revenge might have to do. She forged a resume, polished her accent into the smooth, neutral tone of trained domestic staff, and applied for a temporary contract through an agency. A week later, she was walking through the gates of Leo's Victoria Island mansion in a starched Maid uniform, her hands trembling only slightly. Inside, the world was different. Every surface gleamed. Every step was monitored. Every staff member seemed to move by an unspoken code. Grace, the stern housekeeper, ran the place with an iron will and motherly pride, often murmuring that Mr. Ifeanyi likes order, not excuses. Bayo, the chauffeur, barely spoke, but his eyes held quiet stories. years of watching things unfold from behind tinted glass. Then there was Nkechi, the bubbly maid who laughed too loud and warned too late. "You're not the first pretty girl Leo noticed," she said one morning while folding sheets. "Just don't believe everything he says. He can look like a dream and still be your worst mistake." Amara listened, observed, took mental notes. She began noticing the way Leo's assistants deferred to him with anxious precision, how every visit from his legal team was sealed with NDAs and locked doors. She catalogued his routines, his calls, his sudden meetings with foreign men in dark suits. But what she hadn't expected was Leo's attention. It started subtly, a glance that lingered, a passing compliment, a soft joke only she seemed to hear. Then one evening, he asked her name. The next, he asked if she was new. Amara kept her head down, played her part. But inside, the war began. Because the man she hated, the one she believed ruined her father, was looking at her not like a stranger, but like someone he wanted to know. And somehow that made everything more dangerous. Weeks passed like smoke, slow, curling, dangerous. Amara moved through the mansion like a shadow, blending in with the rhythm of wealth and secrets. She noted everything: Leo's routines, the locked doors he never opened, the late-night calls in the languages she barely recognized. But more than that, she watched him. In public, Leo was the perfect host, the picture of elegance, smiling, laughing, effortless. But in the quiet, unguarded moments, a different man emerged. She once saw him slam a whiskey tumbler against the bar, shards flying, because a client backed out of a deal. Another time, he fired the head chef on the spot after a drop of wine touched his cuff. "Unacceptable," he'd said coldly, eyes blazing, voice low and lethal. Amara soon discovered the mansion was a labyrinth of surveillance. Hidden cameras blinked behind painting. Staff whispered about Leo reviewing footage late into the night. Grace, ever loyal, dismissed it all as Mr. Ifeanyi's need for excellence. But even she couldn't mask the unease that sometimes flickered behind her tired eyes. Then came the night everything shifted. Amara had just finished clearing the dining room when Leo appeared behind her. No warning, no entourage. "You're different," he said, his voice softer than usual. "What's your name again?" She told him, carefully, calmly. He nodded. "Have dinner with me, not as staff. Just sit with me." She hesitated, then nodded. The plan, the mission, demanded she say yes. They sat at the smaller terrace table, under warm lights and the faint hum of the sea breeze. Leo opened a bottle of wine himself and served her personally. For the first time, she saw the cracks behind the polish. He spoke of his childhood, a single-room home in Ajagunla, a father who drank and lashed out, a mother who disappeared when he was 8. "People think success erases the past," he said, swirling his glass. "But sometimes it just buys better walls." Amara listened, torn. There was something raw in his eyes, a loneliness she hadn't expected. For a fleeting second, she felt it, sympathy. But then she remembered her father, his funeral with no guests, the hospital bills they couldn't pay, the hollow silence that followed his name. She smiled at Leo, nodding when appropriate. She even thanked him for dinner. Then, past midnight, when the mansion quieted, she made her move. She crept through the hallways barefoot, heart thudding in her ears. She'd studied the locks, memorized his schedule. Leo's study was empty, dimly lit, and cold. She moved quickly to the desk. The bottom drawer, always locked. It took her 3 minutes with a hidden pin to pick it open. Inside, she found contracts, folders, and a small collection of USB drives in black cases. She didn't dare take anything, just photos. Her phone shook in her hand as she zoomed in on one document. Obi Capital Acquisition, Suppression Agreement. Her breath caught. Her name, her father's. A clause about share transfer, backdated meetings, and silence fees paid to legal firms she vaguely remembered. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She took the photos, closed the drawer, slipped out unseen. By the time she returned to her room, her chest ached with truth. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. Leo had manipulated her father's downfall. The smiles, the stories, the confessions, they were just masks. Now, Amara had proof, and she knew what had to come next. Amara's days in the mansion began to blur, not from routine, but from the whirlwind of conflicting emotions that stormed through her every waking hour. Leo, once just a distant target, now sat across from her during long, intimate breakfasts, asking her thoughts on education reforms and charity outreach. He spoke of his childhood again, not with pride, but pain. A father who used silence as punishment, fists as reminders. He confessed that sometimes he didn't know how to love without control. She listened, torn between empathy and suspicion, between the man he showed her and the man she suspected him to be. One evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the lights of Victoria Island glitter like stars on the lagoon, he leaned in and kissed her, slow, searching, almost reverent, and she let him. That night changed everything. What started as a tactic blurred into something dangerously real. They began seeing each other in secret, hushed moments stolen in the garden, quiet laughter in the library, fingertips brushing too long in the hallway. The staff noticed, and Nkechi, always bold, cornered her one afternoon in the laundry room. "He always finds a new toy," she said bitterly. "You think you're different." So did the last one. She left crying. Amara flinched, but said nothing, because somewhere inside her, the lines were already crossed. Leo insisted it wasn't a game. "You see me," he told her once. "Not the myth, not the money. You see me." And she wanted to believe that. She wanted the pain in his eyes to mean something. But every time he touched her, she remembered her father's hollow eyes, the way his shoulders slumped when he realized his legacy had been stripped away. At home, things unraveled. Her aunt, sharp and intuitive, found a uniform in the laundry basket and demanded answers. When Amara confessed, the house erupted with fury. "You're becoming like him," her aunt spat. "A liar, hiding in shadows. You think justice is pretending to be someone you're not." The words stung. Amara yelled back, but deep down, she feared her aunt was right. Then Leo changed. It was gradual at first. He grew colder, distracted. Meetings replaced dinners. Touch became command. One morning, he told her flatly, "Don't talk to Bio again. He's been with this family too long and knows things he shouldn't." That same day, Nkechi was fired without explanation. Her suitcase was waiting by the gate. She didn't even get to say goodbye. The air inside the mansion thickened. Amara couldn't sleep. She felt eyes on her at all hours. One evening, while dusting her room, out of habit, not duty, she spotted something tucked behind the corner of the bookshelf, a small lens, a hidden camera. Her hands shook as she unplugged it and hid it beneath her mattress. That night, sleep refused to come. She wandered the halls restlessly, avoiding the surveillance zones she now knew by heart. Then, as she passed the study, she heard voices, low, tense, threatening. Leo and his assistant, Ife. "If that girl finds out the truth," Leo said, his voice ice, "clean it up. I'm not losing this empire over pity." Silence. Then Ife replied, "Understood." Amara's heart stopped. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man who'd held her, kissed her, cried in front of her, was planning to destroy her if she got too close. She slipped away unseen, heart thundering in her chest. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. Leo didn't just have secrets. He was willing to bury them at any cost. Now, Amara understood the danger she was truly in. Amara moved with precision, every step of her escape meticulously planned. The files she had gathered, photos of contracts, audio snippets, the damning suppression agreement, were encrypted and sent to a trusted friend from university, now a rising legal consultant. The message was clear. "If anything happens to me, release everything." Her nerves were frayed, her sleep non-existent. Leo's distance had grown unbearable, his eyes darker, more unreadable. She felt watched in every room, every conversation rehearsed like a trap waiting to snap. Still, she pushed forward, certain that her exit had to be soon, before he made the first move. But she was already too late. One night, intending to retrieve her hidden USB drives, Amara stepped into the study and froze. Leo was there, seated in his leather chair, drink in hand, eyes burning with something between fury and fascination. "Going somewhere?" he asked calmly, motioning toward the door behind her. She didn't answer. Her fingers curled at her sides. "Sit," he said. She didn't, so he continued anyway. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. From it, he laid out her original resume, a copy of her university transcripts, photos of her and her father, even the email she'd sent to her lawyer friend. Encrypted, yes, but clearly intercepted. "You think you fooled me?" Leo's voice was quiet, dangerous. I knew who you were the day you stepped into my house. I let you stay because I wanted to see what kind of person you really were." Amara's mouth went dry, but she steadied herself. "And what did you find out?" He stood now, walked toward her slowly, glass swirling in his hand. "That you're just like me, hungry, willing to lie, willing to hurt, to get what you want." The words cracked something inside her. Rage, grief, heartbreak all flooded to the surface. "You ruined my father," she said, voice trembling. "He died in shame. Because of you." Her composure slipped. "He spent his last days wondering how everything was taken from him, and I watched it all happen, powerless." Leo stopped mid-step. For the first time, his arrogance faltered. He stared at her in silence. Then he turned to the desk, pulled out another folder, and tossed it at her feet. It slid open, revealing documents she didn't recognize. Emails, share transfer papers, and one notarized letter in her uncle's handwriting. "I didn't ruin your father," Leo said, his voice low. "He was blackmailed by someone inside your family." Amara's breath hitched. Her hands shook as she knelt, lifting the papers. Dates aligned, names signed. Her uncle, her father's own blood, a senior board member at Obi Capital, had orchestrated the surrender of the company's control. Leo hadn't been the puppeteer. He had been the scavenger who arrived afterward, acquiring a company already gutted from within. "I didn't destroy him," Leo said quietly. "I just picked up the pieces." Amara's world tilted. Everything, every step she had taken, every lie she'd told to get close, every moment of hatred she'd directed at Leo had been built on a half-truth. Her father hadn't been betrayed by a stranger, but by someone around their dinner table. Tears burned down her cheeks, not just from heartbreak, but from the shattering of her purpose. She was no longer sure who the villain was, Leo, her uncle, or maybe even herself. Amara left the mansion that night without looking back, her chest hollow, her footsteps heavy with everything she thought she knew. The city lights of Victoria Island blurred through her tears as the taxi pulled away from Leo's estate and the world she had infiltrated, deceived, and momentarily lost herself in. She returned to her aunt's modest duplex in Surulere. No servants, no surveillance, no secrets. Just the quiet, healing ache of beginning again. She found a real job at a small microfinance firm, focused on women-led businesses. It paid little, but it mattered. She began therapy too, not just for grief, but to untangle the years of rage, guilt, and misdirected vengeance that had twisted her identity. But Amara wasn't done fighting. With the evidence Leo had thrown at her, perhaps out of cruelty, or perhaps something else, she built a case against her uncle for corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The story hit the media like a lit match. Obi Capital scandal, insider betrayal, not tech tycoon takeover, the headlines read. Leo's name inevitably surfaced, but instead of silence or denial, he released a carefully worded statement. In it, he acknowledged that some of his early acquisitions had profited from ethically grey areas and announced the creation of a reparations fund for small investors who'd suffered in past mergers. He never named names. He never admitted guilt. But to those paying attention, the message was clear. He had been listening. Weeks later, Amara received an email. One line, "Can we talk?" L***. She said yes. They met in a quiet cafe tucked between two bookstores in Yaba, far from his usual haunts of glass towers and power dinners. Leo looked different. No suit, no performance. Just a man with tired eyes and open hands. "I wanted to own everything," he said after a long silence. "But you made me look at who I became." Amara stared at him, heart steady this time. "And I wanted revenge, but I became you to get it." They said nothing for a while after that. No more accusations, no apologies, just the strange stillness that comes when truth has burned everything else away. Before they parted, Leo slid an envelope across the table. "There's a position at the foundation. We're focusing on ethical entrepreneurship, teaching young founders how not to make the mistakes I did." Amara smiled, tired but resolute. Maybe one day. And with that, she stood, walking back into a world she was finally ready to rebuild on her own terms. 1 year later, Amara stood beneath the lights of a modest stage at a youth entrepreneurship summit, her voice steady, her presence unshaken. She spoke not from theory or textbooks, but from lived scars. "Ambition," she said, her gaze sweeping over the eager young faces before her, is a beautiful thing until it makes you forget who you are. I chased justice, but became the very lie I wanted to expose. The truth is, if you lose yourself to win, the victory is empty. Her words hung in the air, not grand but honest, and when the applause came, it wasn't thunderous, but it was real. In the back row, almost hidden, Leo sat in silence. No entourage, no cameras, just a man listening. As the clapping swelled, Amara's eyes found his. For a heartbeat, the noise fell away. They held each other's gaze, not as enemies, not as lovers, but as people who had faced themselves and survived. They didn't smile. There was no wave, no dramatic gesture, just a nod, quiet, heavy, final. Amara turned and stepped off the stage, shoulders back, steps sure. She was no longer the maid in disguise, no longer the daughter haunted by her father's fall, no longer a woman twisted by vengeance. She was simply herself, flawed, whole, healing. And this time, she didn't need to play a part, fade out,